Well, we're delighted that you're here, and we have several things coming up. There's a sheet as you go out. You can pick it up over there by those brochures, and it has those dates. Okay. Well, I was just talking to them. You ready? Are we ready? All right. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad that you're with us. We are the Smoky Mountain Storytelling Association, and we are a group of about 25 tellers. We do all kinds of events, and we love to do them. So if you have a place like in Chicago where you need a program, we'll have somebody who will want to go up there and do that. And we're going to do a program today with 3 different storytellers, myself, Jim Eastin, I'm the president of the group, and Roland Mote, who's here to my right, and Sheri, Liles. And we're going to be hoping to entertain you or enlighten you or something. Anyway, I want to review the things that are coming up, and as I said, they're on this sheet of paper over there. But our next event is September the 10th. It is a storytelling concert at the Asbury Place retirement home, which is just outside of Mote. And you're very welcome to come to that. And then we have a meeting afterward. If you're interested in our group, we'd love to have you join us. Then September 24th, we are going to be back here for a concert at 2:30. Then on October the 24th, we're going to do an event at the Imes Nature Center, and that'll be at 7 p.m. And then around November the 21st, we haven't set a date yet, but that's called Telebration, and we're going to be doing an event, and but those particulars will be coming up later. So I think those are all the announcements. Is there anything else we need to tell these folks?
I don't think so. Just remind them of the sign-up sheet.
Okay. And we have a sign-up sheet if you would like to be on our email list. And if you'd like to know more about us, we have a website, SmokyMountainTellers.org. We also have a Facebook page. And from there are links to several of us who have stories on our websites. So you can go there to check out some other stories. But anyway, I'm going to lead off today. And I'm going to tell you a story that is me keeping my word. So as I tell it, you'll understand why that is. I am a retired United Methodist pastor. I'm 65 years old. And I know I look 85, but I'm only 65. But 40 years ago, I was a student pastor in North Carolina. And I was also going to the Duke Divinity School. And one of the classes that I took at Duke was called Ways of Worship. And so we learned about different traditions, because in the Christian community there are many, many different traditions of worship. And one of the assignments that we had was you had to go visit 2 churches outside of your tradition and then write reports on them. And so I had a problem because I was busy every Sunday. And so I thought, all right, well, 2 traditions outside mine. Oh, I could go to a mass because they have a Saturday mass at the next town. So that one was easy. But I needed something else I could go to on a Sunday. And in that part of the country, they didn't have a lot of Sunday evening services. My church did, but it had one Sunday, every 5th Sunday, we didn't. And so I thought, all right, that's my opportunity. I can go find a church on that Sunday night that I can go to, but it has to be outside of my tradition. Now, for those of you who are younger than I am, you're not going to believe this, but there used to be a book that had everybody's telephone number in it. And it had white pages, and it had yellow pages, and in the yellow pages, businesses and even churches would have ads and tell you all about their business. So I went to the yellow pages and I started looking up churches, and then I was looking for a Sunday evening, and I found the first one and I looked at it, and it was a Black Pentecostal church. Now, most of you are old enough that you will understand what I'm talking about here. 40 years ago, things were very different. We were post the civil rights marches and movements, but people still didn't mix very much racially, and they certainly didn't at church. And so when I saw that, I thought, hey, that's definitely outside of my tradition, and it's at a time when I can go. So I spoke to my wife, and I told her what I needed to do, and I said, now listen, I can go and just treat this like a class assignment, but I don't think that's the way I want to do this. I want to go worship, so would you like to come worship there with me? And she said, yeah, I'd be glad to. So we looked it up, and it was 7 p.m., and I had been studying in my classes about ways of worship, so I knew it was very important in a black church for people to be dressed appropriately. This was very important in their tradition because this was the place where they could decide. And so it was very important. So I knew I'm going to wash my car. We're going to dress nicely. We're going to, be as respectful as possible to these traditions. And basically, we're just going to go and sit and just be part of the congregation. So we were ready to go. Said the service was at 7 o'clock. So we pulled into the parking lot about 6:45 and walked up to the door. Some nice people came and greeted us, and we introduced ourselves. And when I finished, one of them said, "Are you a minister?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm at your sister church right up here, up the road, Ruffin United Methodist." And one of the young men said, "Would you like to meet our bishop?" And I said, "Well, I'd be honored." So we started to walk down the hall behind this young man, and a young woman who was there said to my wife, "Oh, you come with me." So, I said, "Well, I'll see you in a few minutes," and we went on down the hall. Well, at this church, we went around behind the church, and they had a mobile home that was the office. So went in there. There were about 5 or 6 men in black suits and dark ties, and we introduced ourselves. They introduced me to the bishop, and he said, "Have a seat." And we're just sitting there visiting, and time goes by, and my internal clock said a little too much time had gone by, and I glanced down. It was about 7:15. So I said, "Oh, I guess I had it wrong. I thought everything started at 7 o'clock." And the bishop said, "Oh, it did." Well, I'd never been to a church where the minister wasn't wherever the service was, so I thought, okay, this is not your place. You just go along with whatever's going on. And then he said in a minute or two, he said, "Well, I guess it's about time we went over." So we started back down that hall, and someone opened the door, and we walked in, and I was on the stage with the bishop and the elder and 3 or 4 deacons, and that was not where I thought I was supposed to be, but that's where I was. And the bishop motioned to a chair right beside the bishop's chair, so I went over and sat down. I looked down, and in the front row on my left, there was my wife sitting with the bishop's wife. How did I know it was the bishop's wife? Because there was a huge photograph of the bishop and his wife, and that was her. So, I sort of waved at my wife, and what was going on was testimony time. Now, in my church, if you wanted to have testimony, you assigned someone, and they took about 3 minutes, and that was testimony time. That is not testimony time in a black church. There was a man standing up, and he was talking with great power about how the congregation had been praying for him with his supervisor at work. It was a white man who did not like him. And that whole congregation had been praying to strengthen this man to be Christ-like and win over his boss. And he was telling about how this boss, who had treated him very badly, had said one nice thing to him that week. And that congregation was rejoicing over that one thing. And then someone else testified, and someone else testified, and someone else testified. And in about 15 or 20 minutes, it was time for that to be over. And then it was time for the offering. Now, I'm looking at all white people who probably all go to white churches, and what we do is we take the plate and pass it, and then the plate comes back. That's not how they do it in a black church. The people get up and the plates stay still. So we started singing, and everybody lined up, and they were coming forward and singing and put their offering in the plate, and there was a lady right there counting it as it came in. And when the right amount came in, she just turned around and just paid the bishop right there. And then she counted off a little more, and then she paid the elder. And then when it came, everybody had sung the song and gone back to their pew, she announced there hadn't been enough offering. So we did it again. And we sang the song, and we came down the aisle, and everybody put money in the plate until apparently they met the budget. And I thought, boy, this is a plan I got to take home. And we met the budget every week, and then it was time for prayer time. Now again, I'm from we don't say anything if it's not in the bulletin in my church. So now it's time for prayer. So I'm expecting one person is going to pray and the rest of us are just going to sit there silently and bow our heads. But that's not the way it happened. No, people came forward and they requested prayer. And all of the elders and the deacons and me, because I'm just in the line down there with my eyes wide open, saying, I hope I don't do any of this wrong. And we began to pray for these people. And some of them, the bishop reached out and touched, and they fainted back into the arms of some young men who were waiting for them. And there were women with modesty panels who would sweep them over the legs of these ladies so no one would be embarrassed. And that happened. And I'm just thinking, I've never had an experience like this before. And then we went back up onto into the pulpit area, and the elder got up and preached. Now, I love to preach, but I have 3 points in a poem, and I'll deliver them very quietly and nicely, and everyone will nod, and that's as excited as we get. That's not how they do it. So this man followed a plan that I learned in a class I took called Preaching in the Black Community. And if you've ever been to a sermon with a black preacher preaching, you'll say, I recognize this. I just didn't know this was the plan. So here it is. Ready? Start low. Go slow. Strike higher. Strike fire. Sit down. And that's what this guy did. And as he was going, people were responding. There was call and response. And he would have a phrase that he would repeat. And every time he repeated it, it just dipped deeper into your soul. And you were beginning to think, yes, that's exactly how it is. And when he got done, I was going, wow. And then the bishop got up and he made announcements when the dinner was going to be and what they were going to do in Sunday school and blah, blah, blah. And then he introduced my wife very elegantly. And then he introduced me and told how I was from their sister church up the road. And then he said, Brother Eastin, preach. I cannot tell you the thoughts that crossed through my mind at that moment. I was doing backflips in my head saying, you can't turn this down. You must do something. What did you preach this morning? I can't remember. I have no notes. I don't even know what the scripture lesson was. I am doomed, and it's 10 feet from me to the pulpit. And I prayed the most earnest prayer of my life in those 10 feet. But it was mostly, please, God, help me. And I can only give credit to the Holy Spirit because there is no way I was doing any actual thinking. But I remember what I said. I said, I'd be a fool to preach after what I just heard. But I will tell you this, I know my Bible. And I know you have just done this lesson, which is Jesus and his disciples were watching people at a feast. And they were all fussing and trying to find the highest place where they could sit. And somebody would come along and say, oh no, you can't sit there. You have to go sit here. And Jesus said to his disciples, when you go to a feast, you find the lowest place. And someone may come along and say, oh, friend, no, you come sit higher. And you will be esteemed among those who have come. And I know you know that scripture because of what you have done for us. We thought we could sneak in tonight and sit in the back row and you wouldn't notice. And of course they laughed because there was no way we were going to sneak in there and not be noticed. And here I am sitting with your bishop and your elder and your deacons, and there's my wife sitting with your bishop's wife, and you have shown the gospel tonight. And remember, it's the early 80s, and I said, and I'm sorry to say, if you came to visit my church, you would not be treated so well. But I can promise you this, Next Sunday, I will tell my congregation about your hospitality, and that there's a church in this community that reads its Bible and knows its stories, and you live it out. And I promise you this, wherever I go for the rest of my life, I will tell this story. And today I have. Thank you.
Well, I've done it again. I fooled around and he asked who wants to go first, and I didn't do it. I'm going to learn not to do that. Because I don't have nearly so uplifting story. At least I don't think. Let me tell you about Smith Hardin. He was one of those good old boys down in Sugar Creek. His personality was such that you couldn't help but like him. The man was here around him. You never knew what kind of shenanigans he was going to get in next or what kind of a stunt he was going to pull. Oftentimes he kind of walked along the edge, and if it wasn't for good, solid, adult advice and help, he's likely to walk off the deep end. Well, it fell on Uncle Mote's responsibility to take care of Smith. Now, as far as I know, there wasn't a committee meeting and a vote that assigned him that chore. It just was his responsibility. And so he accepted it and had been close to Smith since Smith was a little bit boy, actually. The biggest problem he had, the biggest challenge he had with Smith, was to keep him gainfully employed. Now, Smith had never found a hoe handle that fit his hands. Every job he had, there was something wrong with it. And eventually he quit. Well, when Ben Wilburn got elected county road superintendent, Uncle Mote saw the perfect opportunity for the job that perfectly suited Smith's work ethic. Ben Wilburn was my grandmother's, and of course Uncle Mote's mother, I guess, cousin of some degree. I don't know how far back it went, but he was a cousin somewhere. So Uncle Mote went to him and persuaded him to employ Smith to be the bridge tender at the only drawbridge there was in the county, perhaps the only drawbridge there was in all of southern Middle Tennessee. It was out on Henderville Turnpike, right where Henderville Turnpike crosses the Buffalo River. Now, the reason there was a drawbridge there was because there was an iron industry in the county. If you are one who likes to explore historic sites and communities and whatever, you might look on your map and look for Iron City. It's down in the southwest corner of Lawrence County, right on the Alabama state line. So in those days, there was a furnace there, I guess you call it, that processed iron ore. Now, the iron ore was mined up in all of western county, or western part of the county, which is up on the Highland Rim there. Very rich red soils, high in iron content. And the ore was transported down the Buffalo River to Iron City and to the processing plant there. They transported it on a barge. And so the bridge there had to be such that the barge could get down through there and go to Iron City. And so it was a drawbridge. And the county had to have somebody there to open and close the bridge. Now, the system works, which is the barge came down the creek around the river, it'd blow a horn, and the tender would know it's time to get up and put the barricades on the road so people don't run off in the river, and open the drawbridge until the barge goes through, and then you reverse the process. Well, that suited Smith perfectly. I mean, he finally found a hoe handle that fit. He loved that job, and he did it for 16 years, 4-term road superintendent. Well, Ben Wilburn decided after 4 terms that he had had it enough and he wanted to not do anything really, he wanted to retire. And so Herman Bonner was the fellow who was elected to replace him as road superintendent. Well, it turns out Herman had a brother-in-law that had the same kind of a problem that Smith did. We wasn't very work brickles, my daddy would say. So he decided that that was the perfect job for his brother-in-law, and so there wasn't any room there for two of them, and so he laid Smith off and hired his brother-in-law to send that bridge. Well, Smith wasn't happy about that. I mean, he liked that job. He'd been doing it 16 years. By golly, that ain't fair. Said that they, at this thing, he just complained to everybody about how he'd been mistreated, about how it wasn't right for this new guy to come in there and just get rid of him because he wanted somebody else in there. And so finally, Uncle Mote explains to Smith, said, I know it's not fair, but says, there ain't no law against what he did. Smith said, well, by golly, I'll fix that. He said, I'll run for a seat on the county court. Now, back in those days, the county government, the legislative, was called a court. Now, we have a county commission now, and the judge was the chief administrator for county business, where we have a mayor now. So the people on the court were called magistrates. So Smith says, I'm going to run for magistrate, and I'll get in there, and by golly, I'll change this. This ain't right. We're going to change it. Well, Uncle Mote tried to talk him out of running. He knew good and well that there ain't much chance Smith's going to get elected. And then, in the longest of long shots, were he to get elected, he was going to be totally out of his league. So, try as he might, he could not talk Smith out of running. So, since he was committed to running, Uncle Mote was concerned about Smith, his feelings and whatever, and he just knew that nobody was going to vote for him. So he said, I'll do a little campaigning and see if I can persuade just a few people at least to vote for him. So one Saturday afternoon, he was out campaigning for Smith. He came by Renzi Wheeler's place. Now, Renzi was the music director at the Marsville Baptist Church. And quite often, there wasn't any choir out there. Every Sunday, if anybody wants to be in the choir, come up here and sit down. And so we'll have some singing. Well, he and his wife usually rendered a special Sunday. So he was sitting out there under an apple tree in his yard at the Broadman hymnal there, thumbing through it, finding out which song he and his wife were going to render for Sunday morning. So Uncle Mote's come in there. He knew Renzi, spoke to Renzi. Renzi greeted him, and Uncle Mote said, I'm out campaigning. Said, I'd like to persuade people to vote for Smith Hart. Said, he's a good friend of mine, and he's running for a magistrate in this district. And said, I'd appreciate it if you'd vote for him. Renzi says, there ain't no way I'd vote for him. Mote says, you're mighty strong in that. Says, you mind telling me what's the problem? Says, he killed my mule. Mote said, that sounds odd. I don't know that. How in the world did Smith kill your mule? He said, he drowned me. He drowned me. How in the world did he go about drowning your mule? And he said, well, by golly, I'll just tell you. He said, old Jake was the best mule I ever had. He was the best tobacco mule that I knew of anywhere. He walked slow and steady, never stepped on the tobacco stalk. He walked slow, and I could use the scratcher in and out, clean the plants and up and down the road. Best mule I ever had. Just as gentle as he could be. Anybody could pet him. The kids loved him. Grandkids loved him. He'd let them climb up on his back, And here in this apple tree that hangs over the fence there, it had some apples that were pretty big, but they weren't ripe yet. And one Sunday afternoon, the grandkids were here, and old Jake was over by the fence, and they were feeding him those green apples. Now, I don't know if he liked green apples or not, but because the kids were heading him out there to him, he felt obliged to eat them, and so he ate a belly full of them, because they thought that was great fun, hold that apple out, and the mule taking it out of their hand. Well, Monday morning, old Jake was kind of in misery when I went out to the barn. He was not in good shape at all. His belly was blowed up, big as the inner tube from a tractor tire. Oh my gosh, he's got problems. So I called up the vet, old Dr. Nance. I told him what the deal was with Jake. He said, well, said I reckon he's just got some blockage in there, and those apples are kind of fermented. So we just need to release that blockage. You know, he'll get some relief. And Renzi's asking me, said, well, can you come out here and help me out? He said, well, I'm busy. I got a surgery going on back here. I said, I got the stuff you want. I said, here at the office, you come get it. And it's about a gallon of it. And said, all you have to do is administer it to the mule. So he went down. Renzi took off his going to the field clothes and put on his going to town clothes and went down to the vet's office. And sure enough, right there out in the front was this jug of stuff, had his name on it. And he, how do I administer this? And so he hollered back in the surgery, and the vet said, oh, said just lift his tail and pour it in. So he said, I took the jug back home and went in the house to put back on my Tina the Mule breeches. And I was wondering all the time, how in the world am I going to get that in? I figured, well, I need a funnel of some sort. And just then, I was walking through the house. I already got my breeches on, walking, and there over the fireplace, on the wall, was Grandpa Stem's bugle. One says, well, Grandpa Stem says, was that Wilbur's Stem? Well, yes, I knew Wilbur pretty well. Said, I never knew anything about him playing a musical instrument. Rick said, well, he really wasn't a musician. Said that was the bugle that he used when he was in the Army. Uncle Mo said, well, I never heard about him being in the Army. He said, well, he was, but he didn't talk about it much. That's probably why you didn't know about it. Says, none of us really knew much about his experiences. Just shortly before he died, he called me in and gave me that bugle and told me the story. He never had talked about it much because he was really ashamed of what he had done. Excuse me, I'm going to get a water. Ashamed of what he had done. Yeah, yes. He didn't desert anything, did he? Well, maybe in the sense of the word, not hardly exactly, but maybe he kind of felt like he did, I guess. He said he was in the Spanish-American War with Teddy Roosevelt. He was right there with Teddy, stirrup to stirrup, as they charged up San Juan Hill. So he's blowing the bugle every step, all the way up there. And when they got to the top of the hill and stopped and looked out there at their vanquished enemy all out there, he said, Mr. Roosevelt looked out there and said, Stem, he said, we've done a wonderful thing here today. He said, this is probably going to get somebody elected president. He said, no, Grandpa Stem, well, we thought about that, took it to heart. And over the next couple of days, he got to thinking, he didn't really want to be president. He said, all I wanted to do was go back home and raise tobacco and kids. So I didn't say, I feel bad about it. I just kind of slunk off, come on back home and stayed out of Mr. Roosevelt's way. So I said, he didn't know I had abandoned the ship there. And says, later he said when Mr. Roosevelt did run for president, got elected, he said, on one hand, I was proud of it because he was a good man. I knew that he would be president. But then I really felt ashamed of myself. What if he really didn't want to be president and I stuck him with that job? Well, that's a wonderful story, but how in the world, how is it that this has anything at all to do with your mule getting drowned? He said, well, all right, I'll tell you. He said, I saw that bugle hanging there, and said it's got a nice milled mouthpiece on it, nice and smooth. And I thought, that is the perfect funnel that I need to administer this medication. So I took that bugle out there in the barn. I raised old Jake's tail and I inserted that bugle and I started pouring in this medicine. When I got about a quart in there, that blockage began to kind of release, it working around there. And all of a sudden that gas came out. And when that expanded through that bugle, Grandpa still never played a louder or more clear note than that one. Well, that's astonished old Jake. You know, he had heard a whistle like that from a train somewhere or another, and he felt, evidently thought there was a train coming in here right behind him, and he had to get out of the way, and he commenced to buck and kick, and every time his hind legs come off the ground, the bugle would blow again, and he was kicking the side of the barn, and pretty soon he had a board knocked off of it such that he could get out, and he run out of there. Every time his feet hit the ground, the bugle would blow, and he hit the road and turned down towards the river. Now, I'm sure that he was mighty confused because the faster he run, he didn't get away from the train any. He just kept up. So the farther he went, the faster he run. And the faster he run, the more frequently the louder the bugle blew. And said, I lost sight of him when we went over the hill down towards the river. And I couldn't keep up with him, no chance of that. When I topped the hill, I saw he was headed right to the river, and the darn drawbridge was open. Old Jake didn't stop. He fell right off in the river, took on water from both ends, and drowned right there. Uncle Mote said, well, now listen, said, I'm sure sorry you lost your mule. But says, don't you think that's a little bit unreasonable to lay that off on Smith? I mean, can't you imagine it was a real mistake? I mean, can't you imagine how he would have interpreted that bugle for being that barge blowing the horn? Renty says, I'll tell you, anybody that can't tell the difference between a steamboat and a constipated mule has got no business being in the courthouse, much less on the county court. So Uncle Mote kind of threw up his hand and went to the house and quit campaigning. When the election came, he got 3 votes. Smith did. He figured, Smith voted for himself. Uncle Mote voted for him. And they figured the other vote was from Cottonwood, Smith's lifelong friend. But Udebo never would admit it. So that is the experience that Udebo had, or Smith Hardin had in his politics. Thank you. Sheri Liles, our third. Sheri Liles, the third of our storytellers, has shown up from whatever her previous engagement was today, and we're thrilled that she's made it. Sheri, welcome.
Thank you.
Now listen, instructions are, you see these tables?
In the balloon.
Jean's going to throw
You
them
want me
at
to
her.
stand either over you or? No, in the balloon.
She's going to throw an eraser. You can get outside.
So, tell me, remind me how much time I have.
Got 30 minutes if you want it.
You got about 30 minutes. If not, Jim gets to tell another story.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Is this the dog days of summer? Feels like it, doesn't it? They're really the dog days of summer from July 3rd to August 11th. We're about 10 days past that now, and it's going to be hotter than you know what. This coming week, probably about as hot as it's been down in the valley, and if you're up here, I'm glad for you. It'll be a little cooler up here. Why do they call it the dog days of summer? Well, this is good. Here's a little piece of trivia for you. They call it the dog days of summer because Sirius, S-I-R-I-U-S, the dog star, is now in what they call in astronomy in conjunction with the sun. In other words, the dog star, brightest star in the heavens, rises with the sun, and it's so bright that for many hundreds, maybe thousands of years, the Greeks, the Romans, going way back, the Egyptians, they have all seen it as the brightest star, and they think it gives off a lot of heat. And so if it's shining at the same time as the sun, then it must be the hottest time of the year. And in North America, that happens as the earth tilts. The dog star is adjacent to the sun, rises in the morning, sets in the evening, between July 3rd and August the 11th, and they call it the dog days of summer. There you go. I'm going to tell you a dog story in a minute. But right now, I'm going to, let's just be honest now. I'm no biblical scholar. I think the best phrase I've ever heard to describe my devotion to something beyond myself is that if I was ever accused of being a Christian, I hope there'd be enough evidence to convict me. So don't take it from me that any of this is true. It's a true story, but I'm just telling you how it happened. All right. So this story connects to the dog story, which I will tell you second. They're both, I'll make them kind of short, but they have to do with lost and found, or maybe lost and not found, as the case may be. About 15 years ago, the news came out and was publicized pretty widely that the rapture was going to occur. Do you all remember this by any chance? Some people are shaking their heads, yes. And it happened in May, and I know this because the rapture was going to happen right around Mother's Day. And I was supposed to sing in the choir at the Presbyterian church on that day. But I had a divided loyalty. I needed to see my mom on that Sunday, but I needed to sing in the choir. So here was the deal I struck. We're going to go over to Statesville, North Carolina on I-40, and I will take my Sunday go-to-meeting clothes with me, and I will be there on Sunday morning and get up and have a short breakfast and get in the car and drive 3 hours back to Maryville, Tennessee and sing in the choir at 10:30. And I will have my Sunday go-to-meeting clothes on, and I won't even have to go home. And it should work out just like clockwork. And on the way over, we were listening to the news, and there was on public radio something about the rapture getting ready to take place, and we were sort of joking about it. It's serious now. It's serious. Could be serious. You don't know. I didn't know. But there's a lot of people thought it was going to be a real thing, and they were a little bit scared, a little bit worried. Maybe they wouldn't get taken up in a rapture. So here we are on I-40, and we come to one of those places outside of Asheville where the traffic slows way down, and it came to a stop. So here's my Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, my nicely pressed little blouse that I was going to wear, hanging on the little hook in the back seat, and it got hot because it was in May. We rolled the windows down to get a little air, and we're idling. And finally, traffic picked up, and we began to move forward. And as we moved forward, we didn't roll the windows up. We just left them down for a little while so we could cool off. And then pretty soon, we were going 65 miles an hour on down I-40, and guess what happened? My little freshly pressed shirt flew out the window, and my husband, was sitting next to me, looked at me and said, "Sherilyn, I believe the rapture has done started." And I'm telling you, we went back and looked for that shirt. We made a U-turn and parked the car and walked back, and we looked everywhere on both sides of the I-40, and we could not find it. So maybe the shirt got raptured, and I'm just glad I wasn't in it. That's story number one. Sometimes in good stories, things come in threes. Here's the second one. About 6 years ago, I took an interest in painting with alcohol inks. Anybody know anything about those? Just what it says it is. It's different colored ink mixed in alcohol, and you can pour it or drop it onto paper that's slick like finger paint paper, that's non-absorbent, and it'll make the most amazing things you've ever seen. And I've learned to paint with them since then a little bit, but this was my first foray into alcohol inks, and I found a course up in Johnson City where you could take a 2-hour course, and they provide everything you needed. And I asked a young friend of mine, used to go by Rachel, now goes by Andy, but that doesn't matter anyway. And so Rachel and my husband and I, Russell drove us up there, and we pumped down our money, and we went to the alcohol inks course. And we made beautiful things. I could not believe what an easy form of art it was to work with, and I could turn out such lovely things. And we made 6 or 7 prints, and some of them, we made a few that were on tiles, and then they dried pretty quickly, but we didn't know that at the time because we had no experience. And then, by the time we got done, it was 7 or 8 o'clock, and we needed to get back to town, and we had a 2-hour drive ahead of us from Johnson City, and so we got us some dinner, and we got back on the interstate, and then every light on the dashboard lit up. Now, we had stored our beautiful alcohol inks treasures in the trunk of the car and laid them out perfectly so that They would dry nicely and wouldn't get messed up. But when all those emergency lights came on, we had no idea what was going on. And my husband said, "We better pull off the road." And we got out the owner's manual and we looked through it. And it just said, "Emergency, stop, do not drive the car." Seriously, have you ever seen that on your car? We were nonplussed. And my husband said, "Well, look, I'm not going to stop here. We're out here on the side of the interstate, and cars whizzing by, and it's dark, and I'm going to head back into Johnson City, at least find a place with some lights, see if we can get that far." We did. We made it as far as the Greyhound bus station, believe it or not, and it quit right there. It died. And it would not restart, and we called a tow truck. By now, it's probably 10, 11 o'clock. Well, pretty soon the tow truck showed up. We had to wait a little while. And when it showed up, there was the biggest man I've ever seen that got out of the tow truck, saying that he'd be glad to tow us back to Maryville and how much it would cost. And we told him that we'd pay, and that was not a problem. And he said, "But you know, I've been on duty now for 72 hours, and I've been up a long time, and I'm just really tired." And he was a big guy, as I said, a big guy. He could barely squeeze in behind the steering wheel kind of a guy. "So would it be okay," he said, "if my wife rode up in the front seat? She'll keep me awake." Well, that sounded a little dicey to me, but what choice do I have at this point? So we said, okay, and we'd already paid him our money. And he said, "Y'all can squeeze in the back seat and sit on the bench." So the three of us squeezed into the bench of that tow truck, sitting side by side like sardines for a 2-hour ride back to Maryville, Tennessee from Johnson City, with the car in tow. And about halfway there, he says, "I'm going to need to pull over and smoke a cigarette since you all got a minor in the back seat. I'll have to stop." So we got some majors in the back seat too, but I prefer you not smoke in the truck. So he got out and he smoked a cigarette or two, and he got back in, and finally we made it back to Maryville. And as they were unloading the car, my friend then, Rachel, now Andy, says, "Miss Sheri, why is the trunk of the car open?" I don't know. "Russ, did you open the trunk?" "No." As soon as they had it flat on the ground and he had driven off, we looked, and every one of our beautiful alcohol inks paintings had flown out the door somewhere on I-40. They were gone. And we discovered that Russell had put the key fob thingy in his hip pocket and had sat on it and opened the trunk by accident as we sailed on down I-40 headed for home. And we lost every one of them. We made up a good story about it. We said that they ended up in some cow pasture, and when the farmer found them the next day, he imagined that the cows had done it, and that those were artistic cows and could be worth a lot of money if he could get them to paint again such lovely objects. That's 2. Story number 3. Maybe about 3 summers ago, you would have found me in the summertime at the John C. Campbell Folk School in Brass County, North Carolina. Glad you've been there, and if you haven't been, I encourage you to go. Just look up their catalog online. You can learn anything from blacksmithing to enameling, quilting, storytelling, ukulele playing. You can make a ukulele. It's a great place. So I went over there and I took a little needlepoint, weekend needlepoint thing. Not that I'm all that interested in needlepoint or cross stitch, but you know, I thought I'd try. They set an apple in front of each one of us, gave us a little square about 4 by 4 and a bunch of yarn, and said, replicate the shape and the colors and the shading in this apple. Well, I just spent hours on that. I did. And I finished it. And I laid it in the back seat of the car. Do you think maybe this was a mistake? Yes, because on Sunday afternoon, as I'm going back, I had to make a stop in Murphy, and the windows were down. It was a bit warm, and I got to the place and went in and bought something, and thought maybe I ought to check on that little square with something, and it was gone. I went back. I looked all along that little 2-lane winding road between Murphy and Brasstown. Nowhere did I find it. That's 3. That's how trouble comes sometimes. You lose things, maybe you just weren't supposed to be too attached to them. And that's the religion that I had practiced today. It's non-attachment. It's a very Buddhist thought, but I think there's something to it. So, my story for today. This is a story that comes from China. Years ago, centuries ago in China, there was a terrible epidemic. Many people died. Now, at this time, there was a woman and her husband. They were subsistence farmers, and they had a child who was about 7 or 8 years old, and this boy had been born blind. And his mother feared for what would happen to him. She took good care of him, and when he got to be a toddler and could get into mischief, she went out and found a dog in the nearby village to see if she could train the dog to be this boy's protector. And so the boy grew up with the dog, and they named the dog Finn. And the boy, the young boy, Lee, was otherwise healthy and smart and capable. But he was not, shall we say, prized by his father. Because his father saw that this son of his would never be self-supporting, would not be able to take care of his family when he got old, as the Chinese culture expected would be the case. And then the unthinkable happened. The epidemic comes along. Many people died, as I said. And those that didn't were out of work. Does it remind you of a recent pandemic? Now, with the mother gone, and the father faced with starvation and having no help, and no means of income, really, there finally came a time when he thought perhaps his son would survive better if he just let him go. And so one day he came to his 7, 8-year-old kid and said, "Look, I'm very sorry, but you're going to have to fend for yourself. You can probably do better begging on the streets than you can staying here with me. People will feel sorry for you. Take your dog, put a few possessions in a little knapsack, and go." What a thing to unload on an 8-year-old. But father's word was law, so that's what he did. And so this boy took off that afternoon, and it was in the fall of the year, and it was getting a time of year when the weather can be miserable, and he spent the night in a doorway in a nearby town. Had a little overhang, and the rain began to come down pretty steady, and he and the dog huddled in there together, and during the night the boy had a dream. And in the dream, a voice came to him. It was almost like he could see a light or something. Can you hold this? I thought I turned that off, but it doesn't turn the alarm off. Sure.
Jim, you've got a reserve sign on your back.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I'm special. I'm reserved.
You are.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
You know, we're often interrupted by cell phones, but usually it's not our own.
Sorry, I know that's not what was supposed to be on that phone. So, he could smell flowers and he could hear insects buzzing. It was a wonderful spot to be in. It was kind of warm. And then he heard a voice, and the voice said, Lee, listen carefully. If you will do good things, your sight will return. But if you do things that you shouldn't, if you are mean or dishonest, or if you love cats more than dogs, no, you didn't say that. Then whatever sight you have regained will disappear. Well, when morning came and Lee woke up, he remembered what the voice had said. It was as plain as day. He could sense the whole thing, the smell of the flowers and the buzzing of the insects and the voice so clear. And he repeated the words to himself. Huh. That day, he made his way down an alleyway to where he knew there was a baker who sometimes would give away old bread. And as he sort of made his way down the alleyway led by his dog Finn, he stumbled over something. Watch what you're doing. Can you not see where you're going, boy? And he said, I'm so sorry. No, I couldn't see. I'm blind, you see. And my dog usually warns me, but I'm blind too. And not only that, but I'm crippled. I can't walk and my legs are stretched out here. Where are you going? Do you have food? No, sir, but I was on my way. There's a baker just a short way down, and I was going to see if he had leftover bread, and if he does, I'll bring you some. Thank you kindly, but watch your step. And sure enough, the baker did have a loaf of bread, and Finn took half of it for he and his dog, and gave the dog a few bites, and he ate some, and he gave the rest to the beggar lying there in the alley. And then he went on his way. The next morning when he woke up, it was really interesting. He'd never experienced this. You can experience it now. If you close your eyes and pass your hand in front of your face, can you see that shadow? That's the way it was. He couldn't see anything clearly, but he could see a shadow of something if it moved across his visual field. This was new. Maybe there was something to that dream. The weeks went by. It got colder and wetter. He made sometimes money by the dog doing tricks in a town square, and people would throw pennies. Sometimes he would beg for food. For a week or so, he found a potter's shed, and the potter put him to work stacking up all the broken pots. But that work ran out, and he had to move on. Then one day, he was headed down toward the river. And he had spent the night, it was a rainy night before, and there was an old woman sitting beside the road, and she called to him as he went by. You, boy, do you have water? I'm so thirsty, I haven't had a drink, and it's been a long time. I hear the river. Can you get me some water? I can't make it any further. And Lee said, of course. And he and Finn went down to the river, and Finn lapped up some water, and he took his little tin cup that was in his pack, and he took a cup full of water back to the old woman, and she drank it and asked for more. And 3 trips he made, and he gave her water, and she thanked him. That's so much better, and I need to get to my brother's house, and if you could just take my elbow and leave me, I can tell you right where it is. I know the address, I'll recognize it. And so he took her on to the next village and delivered her to her brother's house where she would be safe. Woke up the next morning. Now he could not see only shadows. He could make out distinct shapes. He could see large things like buildings and trees with light behind them. Something he had never experienced before. And that day, continuing on down alongside the river, he made a camp for the night under a large tree. Woke up the next morning, 2 days later. Finn, it's the first thing he reached for. Finn? Finn! Finn! And he called, and pretty soon here came his dog, carrying a dead chicken in its mouth. Oh, Finn, what have you done? Where did you get this? Oh, I can't believe you've done this. He had no idea where that chicken had come from. He had no way to cook it. It really didn't. It wasn't of any use to him. So he did the only thing he could think to do. He went to the village, and he found the market, and he asked, would somebody at the market buy the chicken? And he took those few coins and bought something that was ready to eat, some rice cakes, and piece of bread and gave some to his dog and kept the rest of the money. And he thought, I feel bad, but I have no idea. When he woke up the next morning, he was back to seeing only shadows. Nothing distinct. He had lost part of his sight. Okay, I know it was dishonest, but okay, I have to find the woman who owned the chicken. And so he asked, he made his way to all the farms around, and finally, he came to an old place, and the woman who answered the door said, "What do you want?" And here, get hold of your dog there. Some dog carried off one of my chickens just last night. Oh, he said, it was my dog, and I'm so sorry, I'm looking. You're the very person I'm looking for. Why is that? She said. Because I sold that dead chicken at the market, and I have some coins left, and I want you to have them. They're not really mine. I see. And she went back in her house. And she got a cup of soup and some cooked potatoes and gave them to Lee. And Lee split it. She said, "Thank you for your honesty, but you need these coins worse than I do." And she came back. And the next morning, his sight was beginning to return. Now the story takes a darker turn. It rained for several days. The river rose, and he continued along the side. How am I doing on time? I'm almost done. And he saw a crowd in the distance. And he made his way toward the crowd. What's going on? Why are all these people here? They said, look, there's a man who, stupid guy, he tried to cross the river. It's at flood stage, and he's stranded on a rock. He'll never make it across. He's going to drown out there. And Lee, without thinking, walked up to the water's edge and said, "Go get him, Finn." Oh, the crowd all screamed, "What have you done? Your dog will never make it out there. He can't save that man." And then someone else said, no, look, the dog, I can see his head. He's halfway to the rock. And then they watched, they all focused as the dog climbed on the rock, and they saw the man put his arm around the dog, and both of them off on the other side and back toward the shore on the opposite side of the river. "Look," they said, "he's saved him. The man's crawling out." And Lee said, "But the dog, where's the dog?" "We don't see him," they said. "Well, just give it a minute. He's got to..." But finally the crowd began to disperse. No dog. And Lee called and called, but no one could have heard him above the roar of the river. And up and down the bank all the rest of the day, and into the evening he walked calling for the dog. And no dog to be found. He slept under a bridge that night, and the next day he searched some more, and finally hunger and cold forced him back to the potter, where he'd had a few bites to eat and work. And the old potter said, "What's wrong with you, boy? Where's your dog?" He told him the story of what had happened. He said, "Okay, you sit down here, you eat, and me and the innkeeper from down the road, we will go and hunt for your dog. He could still be alive." And so Finn, being weak from hunger, did as he was told, and too depressed and too sad to do anything else. And late in the afternoon, where the sun was shining through the door of the little hut, the figure of a man appeared in the doorway, outlined by the sun behind him. And Finn just knew it was the potter. "Did you find my dog? Did you find him?" And the voice said, "Finn, do you know my voice?" And Finn said, You're my father." "Yes," he said. "Yes, I am your father, and it was my life that your dog saved yesterday. And I brought him home to you, and about that time here came Finn, running in the door, just as the father grabbed his son in a big bear hug, and Finn jumping up on both of them and licking them on the face. I'm very sorry that I sent you out to fend for yourself. It was not the best choice I've ever made. I did it because I thought it would be best. But I want you to come home with me, and I promise you, I'll take care of the both of you as long as I can. I'll leave it up to the untold part of the story as to whether or not he got his full sight back. And that's the end of my story.
Yeah, I'll just make a few and we'll be done. All right, well, friends, thank you so much for coming. We've been delighted to have you and to tell stories for you. I want to remind you again, our next storytelling concert is September the 10th, and then September the 24th, we'll be back here. October the 24th at the Iams Nature Center, and then we don't have a specific date yet set, but around the middle of November we'll be celebrating Telebration. You can find all that information on our website, SmokyMountainTellers.org, and we have some of these sheets over there along with a sign-up sheet for you, and if you'd like to make any donations. And I think that's it. Is there anything else we need to announce? God bless you, and thanks for coming.